Hello, welcome to session 4 of the webinar series RFID for Local Governments, sponsored by Impinj and Hana Technologies. I'm Martha Mallon, Senior Director of Global Partner Marketing for Impinj, and together with Hana, we have been hosting topics and speakers to help you build your understanding of RFID technology and how it can improve the efficiency of government operations. We're going to start with a quick demographic poll so that we can find out a little bit more about our audience. So if you can take a moment to complete that, we would greatly appreciate it. In our first 3 events, we explored topics of the basics of RFID technology, the applications and use cases that benefit the most from RFID, and how you can develop your strategies for labeling, tracking, and locating assets throughout your government operations. And if you didn't catch any of an earlier session, they're all available to watch on demand back in where you registered for this session. Today's topic is about advanced RFID applications and future trends that are advancing RAIN RFID technology. And our featured speaker is Aileen Ryan, President and CEO of the RAIN Alliance, who has a front row seat to all of the exciting things happening in our industry. The RAIN Alliance is a consortium of companies formed 10 years ago with the aim to advance passive UHF RFID technology through standards, education, and collaboration. We're very excited to have her today. Now, with a mission to drive awareness and foster market adoption of RAIN technology, its vision is for everything in the world to be RAIN-enabled, improving people's lives and creating sustainable future for our planet. Now, I'd like to point out a few features of the Zoom events so that you could take advantage of during the event today. The first is a Q&A panel. All audience members are muted, but if you ask questions of the speakers and the panelists throughout the session, we'll do our best to incorporate them into the Q&A panel discussion at the end of Aileen's presentation. The second feature is the resources folder, and this contains helpful resources, RAIN RFID resources from the series sponsors, and links that you can click to learn more about the technology in our industry. So be sure to check that resource folder out. Now let's share the results of that poll and learn a little bit more about the audience. All right, so 32% of the audience is local government, and the 52% are from an industry outside of government. So thank you for that. Relative to where you're located, I lost my mouse here real quick. Let's see, can't get to the poll. Just a minute. I have lost my mouse.
It looks like 67% are from the United States, about 20% from Europe, and a handful from Canada and South America, and even a few from Asia. And then moving on to the size of the municipality, looks like the majority, over half, are from towns and cities over 100,000. And then a mix between people under 25,000, 25 to 50,000, and 50 to 100,000.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Anne. All right, so now let me introduce today's panelists. First, we have Aileen Ryan, President and CEO of the RAIN Alliance. Aileen's executive career spans software and hardware engineering, strategy, and commercial operations with a variety of technology firms and industry associations, including Siemens, TM Forum, Huawei, and Motorola. She joined the RAIN Alliance in October of 2022 from senior position at Siemens. Joining Aileen in a panel discussion for Q&A are our speakers that we've had for several of our other panels. First is our co-host, Paul Brown, Vice President of Sales from Hana Technologies. And then my fellow Impinj colleague, Joe Gomillion, Senior Sales Director for Impinj Endpoint ICs. Thank you all for being here today. And Aileen, welcome. Thank you very much for being here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Martha. So good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today, and special thanks to Impinj and Hana for asking me to present this afternoon. As Martha said, the RAIN Alliance is 10 years old this year, and it's an industry association focused on driving RAIN RFID adoption across all industry sectors globally. Now, if I were to summarize what does RAIN RFID do, I would say it provides information about assets and their location, and that's it in the simplest terms. And that information can then be used to drive massive scale efficiencies and open up new revenue opportunities. RAIN RFID is widely deployed in retail, logistics, automotive, healthcare, pharma, energy, smart manufacturing, and a long tail of mission-critical applications. Now, to put the scale of RAIN RFID adoption into context, about 200 billion RAIN RFID tags have been deployed in the last 8 years. And it's a market that's growing at around 25% compound annual growth. So by 2028, we expect to be shipping 100 billion tags per annum, which is quite extraordinary when you think about that. So just the scale of deployments that we will be seeing in actually a very short period of time. And about 38% of all of those tags, slightly more than a third, have been sold and used in the USA. Now, I know this is the last webinar in a series of several excellent webinars where you've talked about the technology and some of the applications where the technology is already deployed to great effect today. And I know some of you are already using RAIN RFID applications in your organizations. So from one of the previous webinars, there was a poll taken and about 20% of the attendees on that webinar were already using RAIN RFID. But many of you here are probably also listening and learning and evaluating and hopefully also planning RAIN RFID deployments. Unlike some of the previous webinars in this series, I am not really going to talk about the technology at all. Instead, I'm going to take a step back and place RAIN RFID in the context of an urban future. And I want to think very much about the art of the possible. So I've taken a number of examples, which hopefully you'll find interesting, of local government and federal government or national government deployments that I think will be interesting and useful to you. Some of them come from US examples. Some of them come from other geographies, Southeast Asia, Singapore area, and other markets where the circumstances may be slightly different. And in some cases, their deployments are a little bit ahead of some of the other geographies and some of the examples you may have seen locally yourself. So before I get started on the different applications of the technology, though, I wanted to zoom out and think a little bit about the role of local government and how that's changing. Now, my slide is repeating itself. Let me move on to the next one. Okay. So we know that global populations have increased dramatically in the last couple of 100 years. And the human population growth in real terms is about 1% growth annually, or 83 million people population growth annually. And between 1800 and now, population has grown from 1 billion to 8.1 billion in 2024. And this is largely the result of advances in medicine and reductions in global poverty. And these have combined to reduce infant mortality, child and maternal mortality, and contribute to an increase in life expectancy. The United Nations estimates that the world population as a whole is going to peak in about 80 years' time. So around the year 2100, it should peak just over the 10 billion people mark as the last of the developing countries develop. And then it will start to decline slowly. But interestingly, coupled with the population increase, we also see increased urbanization. Rural to urban migration is happening on a massive scale due to population pressure and a lack of resources in rural areas. So those are the push factors, if you like, where people in rural areas are being pushed towards considering an urban future. People living in rural areas are also pulled to the city. So there's both a push and a pull dynamic at play here. And the pull dynamic is linked with economics and the belief that the living standard in urban areas will be better than in rural areas, that there'll be better job opportunities, a centralized market, better pay, and higher individual wealth. So globally now, more people live in urbanized settings than not, but we've only crossed that threshold, as you can see in the chart, in 2007. So it's a pretty recent change to our global population, that we're more urbanized now as a species than we are rural dwellers. And that trend is expected to continue to increase with rising incomes and shifts away from employment and agriculture. But why does that matter? Well, most of us on this call are very used to large urban areas, but of course, it is a relatively new phenomenon. So rates of urbanization have been increasing since 1800, when less than 10% of people across all regions lived in urban areas. And now the majority live in urban areas. And I thought it would be interesting, since quite a lot of people on this call are in the US, to see that the US has one of the highest proportions of urban dwellers. But this matters because understanding the distribution and the density of people is really critical, because the allocation and distribution of resources, ranging from housing and transport to access to healthcare, education, and employment opportunities, all of these things should be dependent on where people live. And this is precisely where local government comes in. And so this is precisely why your role is phenomenally important and challenging, because in the grand scheme of things, what we're dealing with today in terms of our urbanized population, we're dealing with new problems that we're still adjusting to, and we're still learning about how to deal with this phenomenon of urbanized populations. So that's kind of the background to some of the use cases that I've picked out. Next, I would really like to launch a poll. So, Anne, if you would go ahead and do that. Of course, all of you here today know your business much better than I do. And in fact, I had to do a bit of research to try to understand the role of local government. And I've taken this definition here from a White House definition, because I knew that potentially a lot of people would be US centric. So I'm going to read out the definition, but what I'd like you to do in the poll is basically identify for me which areas of responsibility does your organization have, and it should be a multiple choice. So you should be hopefully able to select several of these options. So whilst you're completing the poll, I'm going to read the White House definition. So the White House definition says that local government generally takes responsibility for things like parks and recreation services, police and fire departments, housing services, including in some cases local government provided housing, emergency medical services, municipal courts, transportation services, which includes public transportation, public works, so things like streets, keeping streets clean, sewers, keeping them running, snow removal, signage, etc., and probably other things as well. So I'll give you another about 30 seconds to complete the poll. So again, from the White House definition of likely responsibilities of local government, police and fire departments, housing services, emergency medical services, municipal courts, transportation services, public works, streets and sewers, those kind of things, or something else completely different. So Anne, if we can move to the results of that poll, I'd be really fascinated to see. Okay, so police and fire departments, emergency services, that's great. Not so much emergency medical services, that's quite interesting. A lot of public works and signage and sewers, great. I've got some interesting examples of that. Transportation services, and maybe courts and housing services. Together, I've got some things about buildings that you may be managing. So thank you very much for that. We can close the poll and I will move on with my examples. So many of you will be familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and these were written probably about 12 years ago now. If we mentally compare the White House definition of the role of local government with these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, I've picked out 4 areas where I think there's really strong overlap. So Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being. So we saw some examples of your organizations having responsibility for that. Goal number 4, quality education. Goal number 6, definitely there were some people there with services like clean water and sanitation alongside streets, etc. And also I would pick out number 11, which is around sustainable cities and communities. And the concept of sustainable cities and communities in this United Nations definition is around how do we make cities inclusive and safe and resilient and sustainable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some examples of RAIN RFID deployments and applications related to each of those SDG areas. And as I mentioned, some of these come from US examples, some of them come from non-US examples, and I'll try to clarify where they've come from where I can. So first, if we think about good health and well-being. In some countries, socialized healthcare is a nationalized service. And so healthcare is a public service. Primary healthcare is a public service owned and managed by the government and the local government. And there are dozens of use cases that we've compiled at the RAIN Alliance for using RAIN RFID in those kind of primary healthcare applications. I know that the same is not necessarily true in the US. So for today's webinar, I've not focused on primary healthcare applications, but instead on use cases that I think have links with local government from a US or a North American point of view. So first of all, on the top of this slide, we've all lived through the coronavirus pandemic, and the memories of that time are, I think, forever ingrained in our memories. Personally, I recall lots of news stories where the wrong quantities of vaccines arrived at location X, or even worse, no vaccines arrived to a clinic on the day when they were scheduled. And very quickly, RAIN RFID emerged as an essential technology solution to ensure that that process of getting vaccines to the right location in the right quantity, that process was optimized, both nationally and also indeed internationally. In addition, the coupling of RAIN RFID tags with temperature sensors meant that providers were able to guarantee that the controlled temperature requirements of the vaccines were met throughout their entire journey from factory to patient. So that was a really powerful and very recent win, a recent example of how RAIN RFID played a really crucial role in public health. Exactly the same system is used today for organ transplant organs are being transported from one location to another. So in that case, it's crucial that the temperature and other characteristics of the transportation of those organs are monitored correctly, and that the location is tracked very closely so that the recipient and the receiving hospital can be prepared for the arrival of that organ. So that's an example where a very similar type of deployment can be used for multiple different purposes. Next, in this lower left-hand corner, RAIN RFID is a key technology in preventing the diversion of drugs. Diversion of drugs means effectively that controlled drugs end up in the wrong hands. They end up being sold on the black market, and they end up being used by people for whom they were not originally prescribed or intended. At the RAIN Alliance, we recently ran a webinar on RAIN RFID in healthcare, And on that, one of the speakers is absolutely convinced that the opioid crisis in the US wouldn't have happened had those drugs been tagged with RAIN RFID. A much more recent example came to light in December just gone, December 2023, where an MSNBC news story broke, where they had discovered 80,000 bottles of HIV drugs had been diverted, resulting in a $230 million US fraud. Now, effectively, those drugs, those vials, had been identified using only a barcode. The barcode had been erased from the vials, and then the drugs were sold onwards on the black market. The ultimate losers here, of course, are, first of all, the patient who did not get the medication that they were supposed to get, but also the local government, who has responsibility for picking up the pieces of a lot of nasty things that can happen when people have access to drugs in an uncontrolled manner. I was speaking with somebody earlier today as well who was talking about a very specialized cancer drug for pediatric cancers, and the value per vial of that drug was over $3.5 million for really quite a small quantity. So in those kind of situations, you can see how the temptation for diversion is absolutely massive, and RAIN RFID plays a really crucial role in preventing that from happening. The third use case on this slide is ensuring ambulances and other emergency vehicles have the required inventory on board. So what happens here is that when a new team starts their shift in the emergency vehicle, there's a RAIN reader inside the vehicle, and that RAIN reader can very quickly check that all of the essential items that are supposed to be in that vehicle are actually in the vehicle. Clearly, when these vehicles are in action, having the right inventory on board can literally mean the difference between life and death. So again, RAIN RFID playing a really crucial role here. I actually, unfortunately, have a personal experience of an ambulance which came to a cardiac emergency, a family cardiac emergency. And sadly, when they arrived at our home, they did not have the defibrillator on board that afternoon for whatever reason. And the result was obviously a very personal tragedy, which most likely could have been averted had RAIN RFID been in use at that time. So I'm very personally passionate about this particular use case because I see it's a pretty simple system to implement, very, very quick check at the beginning of the shift, but literally can change lives. Now, I'm going to move my slide on here. The next area I'd like to talk about is quality education. Many library systems in the US and beyond use RAIN RFID to optimize the efficiency and customer experience. The Hanley Regional Library System in Virginia is one of the leading examples here. So rather than scanning each item, each book, as it's checked out individually, patrons or members of the public can simply place a stack of books on an RFID-enabled base and check them all out in a single scan. Even better, though, is that when books are returned, RAIN RFID is used in those libraries to sort the return books. So as they pass through the return chute, they're identified by their genre or the section that they belong to, and that they're automatically sent on the correct conveyor belt and dropped into the correct bins with similar titles. So that gives the libraries a great efficiency. In Hong Kong, they're implementing self-service library stations in order to counteract the lack of public libraries in the region. So Hong Kong, obviously, quite a small area in terms of the number of square miles and an enormous population. So they don't have a lot of real estate opportunities for libraries as we probably know them. So instead of that, they set up literally 24-hour library stations that are a bit like vending machines. and they allow users to check out and return titles, to pick up reserved materials that they may have reserved online in advance, and also to pay library fees. And those library stations can be set up anywhere where there's a power outlet and an internet connection. So that makes libraries a very approachable and accessible service for the public, even in areas where the real estate for libraries is challenging. In the lower left-hand corner, educational institutions often possess a significant number of valuable assets. So here we're looking at a picture of children in school. They're working with a lot of laboratory equipment. We might be talking about laptops. We might be talking about projectors. All of that equipment, as you know, costs a lot of money. And RAIN RFID technology is being used today to track those assets throughout the premises, ensuring that they're used efficiently and preventing loss or theft. By very simply attaching RAIN RFID tags to these items, the administrators can monitor their locations and movements and facilitate better resource management faster and with greater accuracy. And the last example here, so unlike when I grew up, I find it actually a little bit sad that in order to ensure the safety of our students, schools now need to invest in mechanisms to ensure that only authorised people can be on site within the school environment. It's pretty common in the UK where I live for schools to now look like sealed compounds surrounded by very tall fences with gates that are strongly controlled. However, we are starting to see students carrying access badges with RAIN RFID tags, and that allows them to enter the school, and in some cases it also allows them to enter only certain areas in the school. So for example, older students may not be allowed to enter the kindergarten area. This is obviously a very effective and efficient system to provide access control in those kind of environments where you have potentially a lot of people moving simultaneously. The exact same system can also be used to automate attendance records, which is an efficiency improvement over a manual task. And the same system can be used in the opposite context to make sure that children don't leave the school environment when they're not supposed to. My son actually has run away from school a few times. The word that they use for that in the UK is that children elope from school. I'm not sure why they use that word. I think it's to make me as a parent feel better about the behavior of my offspring. But of course, the opportunity for him to run away from school would be prevented if he were carrying a RAIN RFID tracking system, and that would be a great bonus as far as I'm concerned. So those are some examples of education, some in the US examples and others not in the US. The next group of examples is around waste collection. So waste containers in the lower left-hand corner here are actually getting smart. So when the collection truck comes to empty them, they can communicate their unique identification code to a RAIN reader that's mounted on the vehicle. And that allows collection activities to be logged and available for accounting of services provided. And this is particularly useful in situations where, for example, they need to account for the fact that a bin was not collected, maybe a bin was missed or the access to it was blocked, or perhaps even the bin was contaminated and it couldn't be lifted by the operative. But there are even better advantages, and I was in Ireland a couple of weeks ago visiting my parents, and they already had this system in operation in the area where my parents lived. So each family home over the course of a year can produce anywhere between 500 kilos and 2,000 kilos of waste. And so in any given day, the collection vehicle for waste doesn't know if they're going to be picking up a a huge amount, a huge volume of waste, or a very small volume of waste. So by being able to track the weight of each bin as it is emptied into the truck, the route of another truck can be optimized or altered in order to pick up the slack of volume that the original truck may not have been able to handle. So really great, interesting types of new solutions here, just by, again, something very straightforward, really, a RAIN RFID tag on each domestic bin and a reader on the collection vehicle. We can also see that this could enable a system that charges based on usage rather than a flat fee for every customer, and that might be very compelling. And it can also encourage recycling by, for example, maybe paying a bonus or at least a lower charge where each family household has lower volumes of waste that are being picked up. In the lower right-hand corner here, there's a whole set of other use cases for RAIN RFID, increasing opportunities for recycling and reuse of items and avoiding them going to landfill. So again, using a RAIN RFID reader, recycling companies can automatically retrieve the information from a garment and access data related to the fabric's origin and the composition. And that can streamline the sorting and recycling process, ensuring that materials are accurately processed and reused. And so here, effectively, what we're doing is enabling more reduce, recycle, and reuse. And the more that we do of that, the less there is for local governments to deal with in landfill. And the final example in this section in the top of the slide is the use of RAIN RFID for water and wastewater treatment. This example actually comes from New York. So it's a wastewater treatment plant, which is where there are drones equipped with RAIN RFID readers, which are used to inspect and monitor water and wastewater treatment facilities. RAIN RFID tags are placed on various assets and components throughout the facilities. And the drones flying overhead can then quickly and easily locate and identify those items during inspections. So that not only reduces the inspection time, but improves accuracy and also allows the monitoring of some hard to reach areas of the facility. So there's tremendous operational efficiencies, safety improvements, and the risk of lost or misplaced items within the treatment plant. RAIN RFID and sensor technology can also be used to monitor the quality of the water throughout the treatment plant. For example, sensors that monitor pH or temperature and turbidity. And that data can then be analysed in real time to identify any issues in the treatment process and to track the movement of wastewater through the plant, providing data that can be used, for example, for process optimization and quality control. So that combination of RAIN RFID and different sensors, again, opens up fantastic new creative ways of optimizing, improving the efficiency of these kinds of services. And the last set of examples, looking at the United Nations goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. So a lot of the use cases that I've looked at already are effectively linked with the ability to provide sustainable cities and communities. So things that reduce the harm that we do to our environment on a daily basis, or things that we do to make our communities thrive, things like library and improved waste management and water quality. But here I've chosen three quite diverse use cases that are also applicable to local government, but very much along the theme of smart and sustainable cities. So first, in the lower left-hand corner again here, property management. Now in the US, I'm not sure how extensive the concept of social housing or housing stock that's provided by local government for disadvantaged members of society is, but that this is very common in Europe. Regardless of whether you do or don't manage social housing, though, I'm sure there are other publicly owned and managed properties like courtrooms or even prisons, all of which can benefit in similar ways. So here, looking at property management, RAIN RFID tagging and sensors combined can track the condition of properties and equipment. So we can have real-time data on maintenance needs, energy consumption, heating systems, making sure that its heating and air conditioning systems are working optimally. And we can also avoid situations like damp conditions or water leaks or malfunctioning equipment. And that means that the people responsible for these buildings can enhance and optimize tenant experience and improve operational efficiency and sustainability, and of course, social impact. And again, here in the UK, there have recently been a number of court cases where some children were living in quite damp conditions and developed very bad asthmatic responses, partly as a result of their living conditions. And clearly, nobody wants that, and nobody wants responsibility for that. So using RAIN RFID and sensors in that kind of context is actually a very powerful solution. The second example here on the top of this slide is in relation to fleet management, and many of you in the poll that we did spoke about having responsibility for different kinds of vehicles, whether those are emergency vehicles, police vehicles, or public transportation. And if you have responsibility for an extensive vehicle fleet, you will already know that it's important to track mileage statistics and monitor safety and analyze consumption of those vehicles to manage performance, and to even look at things like tread wear on tires. Now, tires for buses or large vehicles are immensely expensive, and using RAIN RFID just to drive the retreading process provides incredible efficiencies. And I came across some data related to this that I thought I would share. It comes from the British Tire Manufacturing Association. And they state, I think I found this even on their website, that retreading truck and bus tires delivers 3 times the resource efficiency and consumes 4 times fewer tires than using single life tires. So when you think about the cost impact of that, but also when you think about the resources that are actually included in tires, right? So rubber and steel in vast quantities. Both of those items are very precious planetary resources, or use very precious planetary resources, which are scarce. And they actually also consume enormous quantities of energy to manufacture them in the first place. So just by making sure we're optimizing the retreading process on vehicles that local governments are responsible for provides us with an incredible impact from a sustainability point of view. And then finally, smart transportation. And this is probably something that you're familiar with already, but RAIN RFID technology has in many cases already revolutionized transportation systems in cities. So we see a lot of smart parking examples where RAIN RFID tags embedded in vehicles and parking spaces allow for automated parking management systems so that you can quickly locate an available parking spot, reduce congestion, and save all of our precious time. So that's very valuable. And also you in the US will already be very familiar with use of RAIN RFID in electronic road toll collection. So again, here the vehicle is equipped with a pretty simple RAIN tag, usually on the windscreen, and the toll collection system automatically reads that as the vehicle approaches the toll system. That eliminates the need for physical toll booths, and automates the payment process. And again, that not only reduces traffic congestion, but also enhances traffic flow, makes commuting much more efficient for all of us. That was the last example that I had to share with you. So thank you very much. I really hope that some of those examples are new to you. And I hope that they give you some food for thought about what's the art of the possible for local government, particularly those in urban areas. And now we're going to go to our panel, and I'd like to welcome back Paul and Joe and Martha for our panel session.
Wonderful. And we have a couple of questions. But first, a couple of questions from us from the backstage. So you shared a lot of wonderful use cases, Aileen, and throughout your presentation. But how does the RAIN Alliance, what do you do to help with the emergence of these types of use cases and stimulate an in customer interest in participating with these technologies?
Thanks, Martha. So the role of the RAIN Alliance is to foster market adoption globally. And so we work with our member companies. We have about 150 member companies globally who provide all different elements of RAIN RFID systems. So ranging from companies like Impinj, of course, who provide the RAIN RFID chips to begin with, to other organizations like Hana and software companies and end users on the other end of the spectrum. So we, first of all, one of the most important roles of the RAIN Alliance is to bring together that entire ecosystem so that we can understand what is it that provides the most value to the end user, and then technically, how do we, what pieces of technology do we need in order to create that solution in the most efficient way possible and the most cost-effective way possible so that we're optimizing the outcome for end users. So bringing together the ecosystem first is a great benefit of that the RAIN Alliance brings for all of these kind of examples. But then we also work at a much more deep level where, for example, there may be some technical challenges, like, for example, some of the examples around drug diversion. So there are some technical things that we need to be aware of about the laws of radio frequency physics when you're attaching a RAIN tag to a vial that contains liquid or to a different form factor. So we also have the concept of working groups where our members work together to solve some of those more technical challenges on behalf of the industry as a whole. So I think the benefits range from the kind of simple act of connecting the ecosystem to some very detailed technical work to make advances to make these solutions really work.
That's critical. So I'm going to kind of dovetail that into questions, or directing the next question to Paul and to Joe. Paul, first, in your experience, how important is the collaboration between local government operations and the technology providers that are providing these solutions? And when you're driving solutions with RFID applications, what strategies has Hana found that work best in partnering with government operations workers?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, the biggest thing initially is trying to find out what the problem is we're trying to solve, obviously, right? That's number one, because RFID, unfortunately, isn't going to solve every issue out there, but we really need to understand what the problem is from the end user, and then based off of that, then we can figure out which inlay design and technology will be the best solution. And then we work with our partners because we only make the actual inlay. So we're getting the IC from Impinj, and then we're putting that on an inlay, and then we're working with our partners that create that into a label that then can go onto the good or medication or the end product. So it's really working all together to solve that problem that the end person or consumer has.
Right. And I can speak from my role as partner marketing is those introductions between services providers, software providers, technology providers, and with our own engineers internally to find the right set of partners that can help in customers and operations teams. So, Joe, any
Yeah,
example?
no, I definitely wanted to jump in on that one because at the IC level, this communication and collaboration is super critical. That's where we can do things like on the technical side, as Aileen was alluding to, where we're building feature sets at the chip level that can address issues, whether it's a performance issue, an additional memory issue. There's a lot of things that we can do at the chip level to specifically address those types of pains, if you will, inside the total solution set. So we do that all the time. Collaboration is critical. We need to learn as much as we can all the way down the value chain to be able to deliver the best solution that we can. And we do that every day we can. Yeah.
Well, and here's a great example. A question from the audience is, what readers were used on the drones examples that Aileen talked about? So, Joe, you want to talk a little bit about reading, and Aileen, maybe you can give us a little bit more information about that specific use case. So, Joe?
I'm not sure what the specific reader was. I will say that, we do have a very strong reader chip in the market. It probably dominates about 85% of the share of the market overall from a reader IC perspective. And we work with a lot of different partners that are extremely capable of designing very customized readers to fit on exactly these types of applications. The drone project has been around for a while. It would have to be a super light reader, but it definitely has been done, can be done. And we continue to work with improving the performance of the IC, of the overall system with those readers on drones. And I actually think it's a really unique and very cool application. So it does all kinds of different things when you put a reader on a drone. You can go almost anywhere. It's quite amazing, actually.
Cover a lot of ground.
Cover a lot of ground, yes.
There you go.
We were
Aileen,
doing, I remember the day we were doing literally big cell phone towers, doing inventory on the antennas that are up inside those cell phone towers. It's pretty awesome application.
Fantastic. Aileen, anything more that you can share about that specific example?
Not about that specific example, but I did want to say that there are lots of different form factors for readers, and one of the trends that we're seeing is the growth of the growth of non-handheld readers, if you like. So, if we go back a number of years, the dominant form factor for readers would have definitely been handheld. And we see that changing, and we've just recently published a market research report that shows the proportional growth in both of those sectors. But we've also just last week had a great statement from Qualcomm, which is in a blog post that I put live, where they are working towards having rain readers in handsets, enterprise handsets, and with consumer devices following very swiftly along that path. So I think the diversity of different form factors of readers opens up tremendous opportunities for new and enhanced use cases.
That's awesome.
And Joe, I think you had mentioned earlier, Joe, you're creating smaller and smaller chips to make those readers smaller and smaller. And as the form factor becomes smaller, the opportunity to put them in various places becomes even bigger. Yeah. So it's amazing.
Yeah, with greater sensitivity, that's the way the technology goes. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. And let's talk a little bit more about, because there were some questions in here about various ways that you can tag items. So how does your organization, this goes to Paul, from a public works perspective, how does your organization support hard to tag assets and durable hard tags? So what does Hana do in that space?
Yeah, again, we would work with the customer, defining what the issue is and working on a solution that would be good for that. For example, we have a more durable tag that gets embedded into the sidewall of tires. I know Aileen mentioned tagging tires before. Ours actually get embedded inside the tire, and they're tracking again retreading of that tire, as well as the tire that was leased is the tire they gave back at the time for the retread. So it serves both purposes. But again, that's a specialized tag for a very harsh environment. And we've done, I think it's 75 trillion miles in truck tires without one failure. So proud of that.
Good. Sounds good. And Joe, let's extend that into why the chip matters in hard tags and various form factors, especially when we go back to the public works example and when we're talking about sewers and wastewaters and metal assets. How does the chip help?
Yeah, we definitely need to be able to understand the different physics at play when an RFID solution or a range solution is being considered. The materials can have massive effects on how RF performance can actually operate in different environments. So yeah, it's a critical piece. We do, good example, we have a feature built into our Monza chip line that's called Auto Tune. It literally gives the chip, the IC the flexibility to kind of measure the environment, if you will, and then adjust to perform at an optimal level. Obviously there's some restrictions to that, some constrictions, if you will. But still, it's a feature that built in, it works phenomenal, especially in some of the larger use cases that have been deployed. When we know what's happening or needs to happen within the environment, we have a lot of capabilities to design at the chip level these types of features that can help the overall system perform at a higher level. That's
fantastic. Here's a question that's coming in from the audience, and Aileen, it's asking to go back to some of the healthcare use cases. So the question or the comment is, we provide location information to healthcare, providing passive RFID to hospitals, and how would I fit in, or the solution provider? And we use RFID passive tags and readers sending info into our hardware. And how do they fit in to the RAIN, or how do they get to the RAIN space?
I would say I don't quite understand the question, Martha. Maybe there's a nuance in it.
Yeah,
So
the question is like, how do I fit in providing location information to healthcare and passive RFID to hospitals? So I guess
RAIN RFID is a passive RFID technology which provides location information for assets that are tagged with RAIN RFID. So if the question is around maybe patient care, perhaps it's around patient care, those kind of applications. Yeah,
sending information to our software. Yeah, it's an entire platform, right? It's what is tagged, how it's read, how it gets to the software, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I deliberately didn't talk about the kind of patient care applications or the in-hospital applications, of which there are many, and I stayed away from them only because I thought they were maybe less important for local government. But there are for sure lots and lots of systems in place where RAIN RFID is used, similar to the ambulance example that I gave. For example, in operating theaters, before you start surgery, do you have everything that you're possibly going to need for this surgery? So you're maximizing the outcome for the patient and minimizing downtime for the operating theater. Also, we see RAIN RFID being used in sort of clinical environments, for example, outpatient treatment, where you're given a RAIN RFID tag on a bracelet, and that tracks both the patient's patient's progress throughout the facility for their treatment, and also ensures that they are getting the right treatment, the right drugs, etc., etc. We see an example as simple and glorious in its simplicity as tracking the sponges or swabs that are used, surgical sponges or swabs that are used during a surgery, and making sure that none of those are left behind in the patient when the patient is closed up. So, honestly, there is no limit to what can be achieved using passive RAIN RFID tags in clinical settings. Wonderful. I don't know if that answers the question or not, though.
We'll see.
Couple comments there, Aileen, to tie on to what you're saying too. With this group, I would go probably to some asset tracking, like you were just talking about, not just gauze, but think about scalpels or very high-end, expensive tools that are used during surgery. Maybe it's an actual defibrillator or something inside the hospital. You want to be able to see, you'd have to create checkpoints or choke points, if you will, if you're trying to track assets and then be able to generate a location, if you will. So I think it's a wonderful use case also where you can identify what floor, what room is that asset located in, or even inside a specific room, did that asset leave the room? Did the scalpel leave when the patient left, for example? Because not just gauze get left in patients. It's insane the kind of stuff that happens. But there's a ton of opportunity to track some very expensive assets inside the healthcare space for sure.
Right. Returning back to the local government and operations, Aileen, for you, what's the scale of RAIN RFID deployments in local governments to date, and how do we expect to see that grow over time?
Excuse me, I don't actually have a statistic that I can speak to immediately. When we did our market research report earlier on this year, we did not call out local government as a separate category. I know that anecdotally, about 20% of local governments are using RAIN RFID for some applications. But of course, then the question is, how many applications can they really use RAIN RFID for? And you know, the answer to that question is, I think it's limitless and boundless. And you know, we would love to see local government engaging with the RAIN Alliance to drive further education on what are the needs and make sure that we as a community are able to meet those needs.
Right. Fantastic.
With the partners, put the solutions together to solve those problems for sure.
Yeah.
Right. You never know.
That's what we're here for.
And everybody can deploy it differently.
Correct.
Depending on how it is best. And so this is a good area of talking about how do you set aside facing budget constraints. So local governments often face budget constraints, and new technology adoption is you have to get a lot of people to agree that we're going to go down a path. What advice, let's start with you, Paul. What advice would you give cities and public works departments looking to invest in RFID technology? How can they start small, grow, and then track the return on investment to get further support for their projects?
Yeah, there are partners that we work with that do very simplistic solutions to be able to supply tags and a reader and some software to start tracking to show the capability of the technology. Because a lot of it is that you really need to show what you're going to save or the problem you're going to solve and the benefit that you're going to get from that to then justify the bigger expense that it would take to possibly install it at a bigger scale. So that's typically what partners are doing, and they're showing those easy use cases, showing the benefit and what they can gain from that, and then allowing that to deploy at a bigger scale, as I mentioned.
Right. Aileen, advice there on proving return?
Yeah, I was just going to add, you know, certainly what Paul said, there's nothing like trying it to really convince yourself that it works. But for example, the RAIN Alliance does run a series of webinars that show proof points of use cases across all kinds of different industry sectors. And we're running a conference which is in Florence in Italy in a couple of weeks' time, which is a lovely destination, but I don't expect with this short notice that many people will suddenly decide to travel transatlantic to that. But for example, we have people on the stage there include the Swiss railway network operators. And so, you know, there's obvious parallels between public transportation systems, in that case, a rail system, and other types of public transportation systems. And in general, my finding with this community is that people are really willing to share information. You know, they're very happy to show the benefits and encourage others and be helpful. It's a really friendly and supportive community.
Yeah, I know the best part of my job is learning the stories from our partners and from their end customers. And in the Impinj website, we have a good collection of customer stories across all industries. And so that's kind of the primary focus of my job. Let's talk a little bit back in the subject of urbanization. So the rapid pace of urbanization and population growth. I think this kind of goes into not just how do we start small and get return on investment, but what are the key challenges that happen when you're implementing RFID solutions in large scale municipal settings? And how can cities prepare for those big challenges now? Aileen?
Excuse me. I was just going to say, think about the Hong Kong examples, right? And think about how RFID systems can be additive, right? So they can almost counteract the fact that this is a huge metro urban area and still give the citizens the services as if they were living in a much smaller, more localized environment. So for me, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about RAIN RFID is how you can use it to overlay and make, enhance people's way of living within large urban environments.
Yeah, and I think the data gathering, the research. Joe, you talked a little bit about advances in the chip memory and information that's shared and information that is logged, and the integration of the data that comes into AI applications. So thoughts on the chip and its role in data?
It's all about data collection and identification. Absolutely. I know that when you talk about large, there's both public and private events that are oftentimes could implement, RAIN RFID to be able to collect data on whether it's attendance, usage of new systems, whether it's transportation or whatever. So yeah, there's a great opportunity, and it takes data to really drive actionable decisions, right? So without that, it's tough to really know if you're going in the right direction. Paul said it, test it, try it, figure out what the cost is gonna, and I tell you, I like to act at Impinj as a trusted advisor, because we're at the chip level, we're multiple layers away from, typically end user applications and, standing up projects or pilots. We try to help where we can. But a lot of times it's just making sure you're identifying the right partner with the right capabilities. Maybe it's the right materials, the right substrates, the right helping you create the right environment to really put together the best performing system, overall system that you can. And it doesn't matter if it's at large scale or small scale. Every one of those players in the middle can bring different values and capabilities. And that's really what we need. It's just a strong, robust ecosystem partners.
Yeah. Here's a fantastic question that just came through the Q&A panel. And Aileen, I think this is right up your alley, but what will happen if NextNav gets access to the frequency of RAIN RFID? So can you explain a little bit about what NextNav is and what that's happening and how that might have an impact on our frequency?
Yeah, so NextNav is a commercial US-based organization, and they have purchased some spectrum in the same rough band that RAIN RFID and some other devices are allowed to operate. And NextNav has petitioned the FCC to change the rules around their use of that particular piece of spectrum. Specifically, they want to be able to broadcast at higher power. So the types of services that they're providing are terrestrial positioning systems. So similar to GPS, but not using satellites. So using 5G network-like systems to provide navigation systems locally. They would like to be able to broadcast at high power, and they also want to have priority in that piece of spectrum. The RAIN Alliance, on behalf of our members and in conjunction with our members, I would have to say, we couldn't do it without our members, has done a preliminary analysis which shows that with what we know of the information that NextNav have provided, NextNav base stations will interfere with RAIN deployments, and RAIN readers will interfere with NextNav systems as well. And so actually today, this is a perfect question for today at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So in, 12 hours or so, the FCC deadline for receiving comments related to this NextNav petition falls. We have provided a lot of information to our members and also to the public on our website to help people understand what those implications are and to encourage people to file their comments. And, you know, we'll see where it goes from here. RAIN RFID is by no means the only type of system that is impacted. We see devices, different emergency service communications mechanisms, mechanisms that are governed by organizations like the LoRa Alliance, amateur radio. There are lots and lots of different technologies who use this band like RAIN RFID does without interfering with each other. And that's obviously the way that we really want it to stay. But yeah, we have provided quite a bit of information. And if anyone is interested in reading further, then just have a look at the RAIN Alliance website and you'll find it quickly.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. And a final question for everyone. Let's just kind of go around the group. Looking ahead, what do we feel is the next major breakthrough of RFID technology, particularly for the use in municipal and public sector projects? And so thinking about it from your various perspectives, we'll start with you, Paul. What is Hana doing, and what do you think is the next major impact that will have an impact on your business that will then help municipal operations?
Yeah, well, there's some things we obviously can't say, but we work with customers to you know learn what they're trying to solve, as we mentioned earlier, and come up with variations of what we're currently doing today to try to solve those problems.
Is that variations in antenna design? What?
Yep. Basically antenna design. And then if it were to need a chip change, we would be working with you guys and Joe and Impinj and saying what the customer is trying to do and see if that's possible and then work together to come up with a solution for that in the future. And again, some of that stuff we can't talk about at the moment. But yeah, that's the way we would look at it.
Good deal. Joe, what about you? New advances, next generation of chip technology that you can share?
We need, we need to continue with improvements of performance, especially within the technology. You know, lower cost drives adoption. But when you look outside of just, you know, building the technology, there's a lot of different markets that are still looking at pharma and healthcare, for example, there's a big focus there and will continue to be. Track and trace, inventory management, different types of use cases. You know, the food industry for sure. There's a ton of applications there, you know, traceability, life cycle stuff. So yeah, we're definitely keenly aware of lots of different types of use cases and industries that could have impact on the public.
Yeah. And Aileen, I think with all of the use cases that you described, you know, it certainly opens up a lot of people's ideas of where they can go and the things that they can, art of the possibility, right, to go and advance. But I think one of the things that I find most interesting is the Qualcomm discussion that you had, the entry of putting the ability to read and understand what's out there in our environment into the customer's hands. So the end user, those folks. So final thoughts there.
Yeah, so there's emerging legislation in the European Union called Digital Product Passport, which is going to, obviously it's starting in the European Union, but it will spill over into other jurisdictions in potentially reasonably short timeframes, actually, where, you know, when you think about normal legislative timeframes. And I think the whole, and that's one of the reasons why I find the UN Sustainable Development Goals to be a very powerful way of curating ideas and concepts, because I think the sustainability, sustainable cities, smart cities, pulling all of those threads of different types of use cases together so that they all work in concert with each other, so that the smart water system works well with the emergency vehicles, works well with the, you know, building management systems, etc., and helping us pull together truly smart environments for us as humans.
Smart environments.
For me, it's all around I think it was Paul mentioned it's all about the data, and it really is all about that data and using it smartly, sharing it where we can, sharing it in intelligent ways. And as you said, Martha, having reader form factors that enable new, unknown as yet use cases to emerge, because they will emerge once those, readers become very ubiquitous for us.
And the recognition and acknowledgement of the end user that technology is helping them, because
Right.
to date it's been B2B, track my asset, data behind the scenes, but the impact on the actual person through sustainable efforts, through sharing information, more transparency, it's I think Paul
And
said
Martha,
limitless.
we've heard today, the having RFID and using RFID can save lives, like Aileen mentioned earlier. And
Real
how do you put a price on that? So
Mm.
when you're looking at those cases, I mean, it's a no-brainer that you're saving lives. So you have to implement the technology and figure out a way. And then the other in public works, a lot of that's just going to come down to labor time, right? And labor is getting more costly all over the world. So the more
Efficiency.
you can save that from trying to find a tool that you need to do your job, for example, is going to be huge as we go further on and things get bigger. So
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for everyone's time. Aileen, Paul, and Joe, fabulous discussion, and really appreciate your time. This concludes our series. So not just this particular session, but the series of RAIN RFID for local governments. And we really appreciate everybody's attendance. Again, you can see some of the past sessions through going back to the registration site and signing up to see the earlier ones in technology. And we're really super excited for additional applications, or to be able to come back to this audience and share what happens in the future. So thank you very much for your time, and have a good day.
Thank you
great.
very much.
Thank you all.